We're
And
here,
we're here.
looking all black and white.
Hello, all. Welcome. It is Thursday afternoon. Generational Change. I'm Jen.
I'm Peter, and
So let me just ask this: who is ready to drink neolib tears today? Because
listen,
I gotta tell you, I am so feeling it, and I am extra salty. So let's bring on the complaining liberals.
you're salty. No, you mean
I'm
they're
so
salty.
salty.
Oh, they're salty. Oh, you mean you're salty from drinking all the tears? Well, that makes sense.
No, I'm salty for a whole other unrelated reason. So I'm really like I'm in rare form. So let's go. Let's chomp on some neolibs.
Well, hopefully,
It is
Dr. West.
glorious, isn't it? It's glorious.
I mean, I don't look at it that way. I mean, I feel bad for people that obviously are very fearful of, what could potentially happen under the non-consecutive second term of
You
President
do,
Trump.
you feel bad for them.
I feel bad for people that are scared or just naive about the whole circumstance. I don't feel bad for people that are what you would consider opportunistic about these circumstances, that are just
You
looking at
know,
it as a cash grab type situation.
yeah,
That's
I
what,
maybe 4 years ago,
hmm.
I felt bad for those people. I don't give a shit about them anymore. I don't
No,
care.
but the one silver
I don't
lining.
care if they're uncomfortable. I don't care if they're upset. Good. Welcome to the party, people. I don't care
As we bring in our esteemed guest, the one silver lining that I hope does come from this is that one of the aspects of Trump's first campaign that was a swoon for the Democratic establishment was their ability to fundraise an exponential amount of money. Hopefully this time they don't have that same type of success. Now, if there's anybody who knows a thing or two about trying to push at a progressive agenda through the Democratic Party, and we all saw how that was received, particularly in 2016 and 2020 with Bernie Sanders' two presidential runs, I can't think of anybody who was a better surrogate or just a voice, a whisperer of the downtrodden and the working people of this country that needed somebody to listen to that could really articulate those points as well as anyone that I ever heard. I know we have our good friend in Ohio, but of course we have our wonderful friend who has...
Yeah, I will say this, though, before we bring on Dr. West. Like, I feel like my level feeling of kind of good and I told you so, that is definitely bigger than it should be. So I'm going to need some Dr. West because I know that he handles things a lot more graciously than me. Like, I'm really in a, you know what I'm saying?
It
and
is
for no good reason, really. I mean, just out of friggin' spite.
Well, it is our pleasure. He is a professor. He is a thought leader, sometimes an actor, always a political activist, and a former presidential candidate as an independent in the United States of America. For the second time, and hopefully not the last time, Dr. West, welcome back to Generational Change.
Oh, my dear brother, dear sister, what a blessing, set eyes on both of you.
How are you, sir?
Indeed. Well, I'm blessed. I'm telling, still swinging, still loving, still laughing, dealing with catastrophe. You know what I mean?
There's no other way to do it.
It's a really great time to be an American.
Oh, I can tell you, we need a little Chekhov, we need some Shakespeare, we need some Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, a little Stephen Sondheim, even wrestling with catastrophe. How do you make sure it doesn't have the last word? But you got to be unflinching about what it is, just how grim and dim it actually is. We're not in denial, we're not in evasion, avoidance of this thing. But the one, I just want to salute both of you all, because you all such forces for good, in the language of the great John Coltrane here. Such forces for good. Shakespeare used to say it all comes down to trying to be a flickering candle against the backdrop of a dim barbarism. And that's true almost every moment in the history of the species when you really think about it. You think about the wretched of the earth and the masses of precious human beings having to deal with all of these forms of organized greed and weaponized hatred and domination. It could be patriarchal, it could be predatory capitalist, it could be repressive communist projects that go astray. I mean, all the different forms of oppression, feudalism. And you say, my God, how do we hold on to some truth, hold on to some justice, hold on to some love? Well, that's what we're here for.
Yeah, that's all we can do. So I don't know if you were listening before you came on, but, Peter was saying he sort of still has some sympathy for the people that are, the neolibs that are just fearful and all in their way because they think Trump is the problem. And I maybe would have felt bad for them a few years ago. But since last year, with what we've been seeing, I've lost all sympathy, like for that group of people. Like their ignorance is just no longer excusable. And so I don't have that sympathy. I have no grace for those people, sir.
Oh, no, but I can understand that. I mean, I can understand that, though. But the thing is that all of us are in process. I mean, this is a particular moment where it's just so, it's a nadir, it's a low point. And the fact that I think it's not just ignorance, but it's a matter of a willful blindness and interest and hypocrisy and double standards that is, and arrogance and condescension and haughtiness that all has to be part and parcel of what that Democratic Party has led the country to. Because you can't talk about the neo-fascism of Trump without connecting it directly with the neoliberalism of the Democratic Party, and people feeling as if once you see the rot of the Democratic Party and the only alternative is the neo-fascist Pied Piper, rather than something that's much more decent and progressive and concerned about working and poor people, which is what we try to do. But we don't have the visibility, we don't have the money, we don't have the potency, we don't have the prowess to be able to provide that alternative. So people just swing away from the rot of the Democratic Party and think, oh, I got something new. Trump seems to be speaking directly to me. Why is he speaking directly to you? Well, I've got my own narcissism. I got my own gangster proclivities. I'm concerned about just getting over too. I'm just concerned about just me and my tribe too. And he just says it out loud. He gives me the permission to hate. He gives me permission to have contempt of the people I can't stand. He gives me permission to put down these precious immigrants and black folk and women and gays and precious trans and so forth. Well, anybody who comes along to give people the permission to hate is always going to be popular. That's the history of the species, because that's the easy way out. Anybody knows that lust is always easier than love, right? You can live a whole life of lust and skim on the surface. You can live a whole life of hatred and skim on the surface. It's the difference between Mephistopheles and Faust and Goethe's classic, right? That's the easy way out. And Trump provides that. Trump provides that. And it's just that he got the corporate media gave him all the time he needed. You remember 2016 when we were with Brother Bernie, we couldn't get more than 2 minutes of coverage of his speeches. They covered every speech of Trump from the very beginning. And what did they say? Bad for the country, good for us. Oh, here come predatory capitalism again. We think Klan cream, cash rules, everything around me. It was all about revenues, all about ratings, all about eyeballs, all about short-term profits. Well, that's been, it's the story of the fossil fuel industry vis-a-vis the ecological crisis. Short-term profits.
I actually have said before that I think that Donald Trump is actually the perfect representation of what we are in this world, what American empire looks like, what capitalism, like I can't think of a better representative of what we look like to the rest of the world.
Oh, in the eyes of the world, you're absolutely right. I mean, he's not a cause, he's a sign, he's a symptom. He represents the worst of the American empire. But he don't represent you two.
No.
You all represent the best of what the country has to offer you. So then you got the best and you got the worst. You got the high, the valley, and you got, the high mountain top, and you got the valley. But those who represent the worst, you see, it's easier for them to mobilize people. Anytime you appeal to people's base instincts and appetites, you're gonna have a major enterprise, because that's just the way we're constituted. We're a wretched species. Now, we're wonderful too, but we're wretched. And it's inside of each and every one of us. It's not just them. You know what I mean? Mm. But you have to conquer it every day. I mean, that's what Goethe says, right? He or she who earns freedom and existence must reconquer it every day. That's line 11,574 in Goethe's Faust. And that's real. That's very, very real. When Dorothy Day gave the eulogy for Martin Luther King Jr., what did she say? Martin Luther King Jr. learned how to die daily. That's all she had to say. That was it. Catholic worker. April 5th, 1968. What you mean he had died daily? He had to kill the greed, kill the fear, kill the hatred every day in the name of truth, in the name of justice, in the name of love. And that's true not just for religious folk. That's true for human beings across the board. That's why the spiritual issues and the moral issues always have to be central. Because you can have the most correct analysis in the world and still be a gangster. You can have the most incorrect analysis in the world and still be a gangster. You got to get your soul intact. You got to get your character intact. Where's your integrity, honesty, decency? Where's your courage to tell the truth? Not just the power, but to the people you love. And most importantly, to yourself.
Dr. West, this was an election that was a repudiation not just of the Democratic Party establishment, but also I think the genocide in Gaza played a much bigger role than people are willing to admit. The fact that Trump not only won the popular vote, but won it pretty sizably. And the fact that whether it was your third-party vote share, whether it was Jill Stein's third-party vote share, Chase Oliver's third-party vote share, they were so small. And yet the way I see it is I think a lot of people were so enraged with this administration that they just said, F it, I'm voting for Trump. I don't even care anymore. Your thoughts on that and how the numbers ultimately spoke in regards to, what obviously ended up happening as a result of this election due to the complicity with the genocide. The Muslims stood very tall, especially in Georgia and especially in Michigan.
No, you're very right, though, brother. But I think the other factor to keep in mind is the people who just looked at the system and sees what I see, which is corruption, and then decided to stay home rather than vote for anybody. And you see there, you're still talking about, 85 million folk who stayed home, and those who would have thought about voting and decided to stay home anyway. Decided to stay home anyway. Now, see, that's the sign of the decay and the deterioration of not just the system, but of the culture that goes with that system, the civic society that goes with that system, which is to say the empire as a whole. Because the distinctive feature of the decline of every empire, the dying of every empire, is not just military overreach, it's not just corruption of elites, it's not just impotence of citizens, but it's the inability of those citizens to be in contact with the best of their own history and tradition, and therefore to give in and cave in and feel as if all we have is despair. And that despair is real. And I'm not against despair. I draw a distinction between retail despair and wholesale despair. Anybody who's never experienced retail despair has never lived. Goethe says over and over again, he who she has never despaired has never lived. Despair is something that visits all of our houses and on the way to our houses. But wholesale despair, that's nihilism. Retail despair is wrestling with despair and generating that very thing in Pandora's box, which is hope. There is no hope without wrestling with despair. That's why, Sister Kamala's talk about joy. It wasn't joy at all. It was cheap joviality. Joy goes hand in hand with a pain, as Frankie Beverly, who just died, acknowledged. Joy goes hand in hand with grief, as Dostoevsky points out. Joy goes hand in hand with deep wrestling with forms of death. That's the Christian story. That joy is the fruit of a life in which you've picked up your cross and followed someone who was crucified because of your love for those who were being crushed. And the Roman Empire has to kill you as a political criminal to send a sign that anybody who raises their back will be crushed. And that's the history, of resistance movements, right? Assassination, incarceration, lies, rebuked, scorn, crucified, threats of crucifixion. And yet the beautiful story is, and this is the good news of this day, namely that those of us choose to be clouds of witnesses in the name of a quest for truth, justice, and love, no matter what, until the worms get our bodies. Period. Drop the mic. That's what we do.
I mean, I'm not happy Trump won by any stretch of the imagination. I am definitely satisfied that Kamala lost. That's very satisfying to me, even though I realize that he's a disaster as well for different reasons. But I think that the people that supported her are the people it's a very privileged group of people. It's a very privileged group of people that think that, that he is such a negative impact on them when there's nothing really been different since Joe Biden took over, and yet nobody was complaining about it, right? So we know it's cult of personality, and yet Trump is gross. He's not my guy. But, I actually am glad that those people have to be uncomfortable, because if they weren't uncomfortable, then they literally are going back to brunch, those people.
Jen, I'm gonna pull up that photograph for us to all see now. This, okay. I think in many ways, this picture was taken on election night in Washington, D.C.
But by the way, she couldn't be bothered to address her people.
I know.
She couldn't be bothered to.
Left him out there until 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Shame on her. And you know what? That to me vindicates people saying that she has not the qualities to be a leader and a president. The fact that she wasn't there that night. And this is impressive to me because I really thought like Scooby-Doo, like if you peeled off Kamala, like Hillary was there. And I kept trying to figure out, have we ever seen them in the same place together? So this is at least, somewhat, I can see that she's not literally her.
But what this image, I think, also crystallizes, which you, Dr. West, I'm sure would probably agree, is that Hillary Clinton is still the puppet master behind the scenes with the Democratic Party establishment. This was her candidate. This was her show. And if anybody watched the Democratic National Convention with the list of guest speakers, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it just reeks of that that Clintonism still controls the Democratic Party at the top.
That's true. I think you're absolutely right about that. But it's partly, again, the question of the Democratic Party having such a lack of imagination that they can only go with their quote unquote winners. And when they think of winning, they think of the triangulators. Who are the triangulators? Those who tried to triangulate right-wing Reagan ideology in order to win. You see, Bill Clinton did win, and they're into winners. You see, Bernie actually could have won, but no, they're not going to touch Bernie with a 10-foot pole. And you saw the effort of Harris to try to triangulate the traditional Republicans by bringing in the war criminals, bringing in those who had committed crimes not just against humanity but of genocide.
Dick Cheney, Cheney's campaigning with Lynn Cheney, and then between Obama addressing the brothers wherever he was, and then you had Bill Clinton in Michigan telling the Muslims that, yeah, we're sorry we have to kill your people, but we got to save Israel.
Dr. West, Dr. West, what did that statement from President Obama mean to you when he addressed Black men in particular? And ultimately, almost a quarter of the Black male vote ended up going to Trump in this election, which I think may be an all-timer post the switch in the mid-1960s. So what was your take on President Obama making that statement? And do you believe that had some degree of effect in terms of how they ultimately chose to vote in this election?
Oh, it certainly discouraged a whole wave of Black brothers who can't stand that kind of sense of being scolded, can't stand Black middle class arrogance, especially a Black middle class arrogance from a president coming from somebody who's got mansions around the world and Netflix contracts that go on and on and on. You say, well, wait.
Uh-oh, what happened?
Screen freeze.
What happened? Okay.
Honest here that you saw. We all right?
Yeah. You're back. You're back. You were gone for a second.
Yeah, absolutely. But he did the same thing at Morehouse with the Young brothers. And that was many, many years ago when he spoke to them, scolded them, condescending to them, and so forth. He did the same thing when he spoke at the Black Congressional Caucus, telling them you got to get up and put on your what was he said? You got to put on your sandals and get out of your robes and start working. And so I said, wait a minute, man, who do you think you are? So yes, I do think that certainly was a factor, because it's just so many brothers who are so deeply disgusted with the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, they didn't go more and more with myself. They felt that they had to be punitive, so they're going to do something to get at the Democratic Party. You saw the same thing among our precious Arab brothers and sisters. They want to be punitive. We want to punish the Democrats. We want to make sure that they feel it. We also want to vote for something, brother. We got a campaign that is constructive and visionary, not just punitive and punishing. But I understand the motivation. I really do.
I find it infuriating, and they're so out of touch. No strategy, because honestly, I can tell you, I could throw together an impromptu focus group right now that would be very clearly say that, yeah, you're not going to find a group of black men that want to be condescended to. I don't think you're going to find that as an overly selling way to win people over.
And of course, the irony is that, we're talking to black brothers who gave Hillary Clinton almost 85% of the vote, and white sisters, vanilla sisters, voted against Hillary for Trump that same election. You see, so that, yes, we know sexism, misogyny cuts across every male heart and soul. Patriarchy cuts across every culture we know. But if you're going to zero in on a particular group and act as if they bear a special burden, when the black men are voting at a higher rate than the white women for the white sister. Come on, bro. Get your analysis together, man.
Dr. West, one of the key analyses that is going to be dissected, at least until Trump is inaugurated, is this idea of we are losing our democracy. And yet, last I checked, the Democratic Party, since 2015, when they kind of had an idea that Bernie might actually take off, and he obviously did in a way that even they couldn't have anticipated, they decided that they were going to hook, line, and sinker make sure that Hillary was the nominee. Then in 20, they decided that even when Bernie was trying to be a little more adjacent to the Democratic Party, it wasn't good enough. We're going to kneecap you and make sure that Biden is the nominee. And then finally, this year, they decided we're not even having a primary. We are going to anoint our candidate, and you're going to take it and like it. And so when they say that democracy is on the ballot, I see a lot more democracy in the Republican Party. Granted, it is now fully Trump's party, but this is who the will of the people wanted. There was no will of the people when it came to the Democratic Party for the past decade. And I do believe that this loss is going to reverberate in a way that the Democrats are going to suffer mightily electorally for quite some time. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, no, I think that's a strong case, though, brother. Well, as we know, history is just so complicated. My hunch is that, we're going to see escalating war in the Middle East, and maybe with China and Russia. And of course, in a war situation, truth is always the first casualty, and those who speak the truth are the second casualty. So it's hard to know how history is going to unfold given these escalating catastrophes that we have to come to terms with. But there's no doubt that the Democratic Party has rarely had any deep interest in internal democratic processes. I mean, I was there with Bernie. We broke bread in Nevada when we moved forward. And that same night, Barack Obama gets on the phone and tells all the neoliberals, drop out. We're all getting behind Biden. Clyburn gives a press conference the next day and says Biden is going to be the candidate. He's going to win the primary. He's got enough black votes. Once the others drop out, because it was anybody but Bernie. In fact, they would prefer Trump over Bernie, which is another sign of corporate interest, another sign of the billionaires, another sign of the ruling class saying we'd rather go with the neo-fascism as long as it reinforces our interests than with somebody like Bernie, who was rightfully having a powerful critique of Wall Street greed. Now, Bernie wasn't strong enough on the Middle East, and we always fought about that. And he's always my brother. I love my brother. People don't have to agree with me on everything, but we fought about that. But it was manifest in Gaza. It took him too long to say ceasefire. It took him too long to take the strong moral stance that he should have. But he's always been consistent in his critique of corporate greed. And it's very real. Of course, his recent comment about Democratic Party left the working class of all colors. And there's no accident there. Now leaving the Democratic Party is absolutely right. But it's also true in our independent candidacies, my own and the others. I mean, the Democratic Party spent millions and millions of dollars to keep us off the ballot. We had to go to the Supreme Courts in Georgia. We had to go to Supreme Courts in Michigan. We had to go to the Supreme Court all the way up in regard to Pennsylvania. And I lost in most of those cases. And they had lawyers being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. And our campaign, I raised $1 million for the whole thing. They raised $1 billion in 2 months.
I know.
broke as the 10 Commandments financially the whole time. But our campaign, shit, the Justice for All Party, and Kiana Dent, and Anahita Madabi West, my wife, and my brother Clifton, and Alex, and so many others, we ran out of cash. We never ran out of gas.
Right.
Made it to the end, swinging, still trying to tell the truth, still trying to seek justice, still trying to keep some kind of love and compassion, especially for the least of these, especially for poor and working people, no matter what color, what gender, what sexual orientation, or what national affiliation. That's what this campaign was all about. Democratic Party, anything they could to suppress our voices. Now, what's democratic about that?
Nothing.
Right, but then they're so quick to point out how the Republicans are so restrictive and mess with the elections and they do stuff. They definitely purge rolls. But I don't hear of the Republicans taking the libertarians to court all over the country to make sure they can't be on the ballot. I haven't heard that.
That's a good point. That is a very, very good point. No,
we've had
both parties are just so corrupt.
Oh, it's ridiculous. This is absurd. To me, it's the same. It's the same.
It really is. It's corruption on steroids. You're absolutely right.
It doesn't, you know, I looked at it. I'm sorry, Peter. I looked at it like capitalism needs to implode. This needs to come to an end. I look at Trump as the free fall. And if you had gone with like 8 years of Clintonism, that's like the slow escalator ride to the bottom. And I feel like we can't start back until we hit that point, and people are going to need to get uncomfortable. That's what I think.
Well, the other side of this, and I'm thinking of Herman Melville here, because really at this point we've got to really go to our artists. You know what I mean? Moby Dick of 1851. The brother's only 32 years old. Here you got the Pequod, which is really the ship of the state, obsessed with a white whale, so that white supremacy and its relation to greed, its relation to resentment, its relation to contempt. Ahab himself, very much Trump-like, narcissistic to the core, willing to pay any price for attention. And yet at the same time, what? Well, nearly everything goes under. See, one of the problems of the ending of capitalism, and Fred Jameson, we just lost him, God bless him, one of the greatest literary critics of the 20th century, used to say it's easier to conceive of the end of the world than it is to conceive of the end of capitalism. Because capitalism itself brings down the whole. You can bring down the very conditions for the possibility of life, given the fossil fuel companies tied to short-term greed. The possibility of any decent relationship in the American empire because of the escalating civil strife and possible civil war. Or the World War III, which is not ecological, but human-made, militaristic to the core. Provocation of Russia, provocation of China, escalation of war in the Middle East, facilitating genocide, facilitating ethnic cleansing with our precious Palestinian brothers and sisters, all going on simultaneously. You say, oh my God, whew, what are we to do? We better listen to a little John Coltrane, put on After the Rain or Love Supreme, or My Favorite Things or something, just in order to get us through. And yet at the same time, we know that every moment in the history of the species is one in which we are being tested in terms of what kind of human beings we are.
Dr. West, there are many issues that ultimately determine this election, but it does appear that, especially in a lot of the swing states, that immigration was a big issue. Yes. And one of the reasons that I personally believe that immigration is a big issue, and I tend to be considerably more conservative on this issue than Jen is that I think when you look at what has happened over the past few years, particularly with the railroad strike that got broken by Biden,
that's right,
the growth of what I believe is probably the best overall union we have right now in this country, which is the United Auto Workers Union, led by Shawn Fain. And then, of course, you look at the very bold move by Mr. O'Brien, head of the Teamsters Union, to speak at the RNC, is that labor is trying to get its sea legs right now. And because corporate oligarchy has taken over this country, the thought process of those in power, those that run the multinational corporations like the Walmarts and the Amazons of the world, is to have the lowest paid workers possible and break labor as effectively as possible. That will happen under Trump. We saw what happened when Elon gave all that money to Trump, and Trump went on stage and said, Elon's a great guy and Sean Fain's a terrible person. And of course, he'll make a statement like that. But in effect, what he's saying is that no matter who's in charge, we will do what we have to do to crush labor. If you could talk about the importance of this post-election reassessment and the importance of the labor movement and how that intersects with immigration, I would love to hear we would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, one, I believe that a strong labor movement, and I tend to be in solidarity with the more militant wing of the labor movement, but I'm thoroughly convinced that it is organized workers with great courage and willingness to fight. That's a precondition of any serious talk of fundamental change in a capitalist society. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. Not because Marx said it, but Marx did say it, but it's a fact. It really is. But as you and I know, the business unionism, the cowardly of certain union leaders and so forth, make it very difficult to convince people that the labor movement is as integral and essential as it really is. 6% now in the private sector and more in the public sector, but still so very important. I was blessed to talk to the brother who ran the Teamsters, as a candidate. We had a 2-hour conversation. It was rich. It was very rich. And I told him a part of my anti-poverty program was to eliminate all the right to work laws in the state. That is $27 for minimum wage and so forth. And they were right with me all the way. We had a wonderful dialogue. We really did. But of course, he's got to be practical. And at the same time, he's trying to pit one against the other. And he knows that Biden broke the railroad strike. And tell you the truth, even brother, the other Sean, who when I had planned to go out to Detroit and walk the picket line, they called me up and said, "Could you put it off a day because Biden's now decided to walk the same line?" I said, "Oh, how long is he going to stay? Is that going to reflect a serious shift in his policies?" And so forth. They said, "Well, could you hold it off for the next day?" So I just walked the line in New York, went upstate New York the same day. And then the next day I went to the same place there and right outside of Detroit. But you say to yourself, all of a sudden now this little symbolic gesture makes it like this is Eugene Debs come back from the dead. I said, "Oh, no, like him good come back from the dead. No, this is electoral strategy and tactic. This man has been in the back pocket of the credit card industry in Delaware for the last decades."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Years.
He was there for 12 minutes.
There
was 12 minutes of Joe on the picket line. Yeah. And that's telling. I mean, I they're like, "Oh, but he went." I'm like,
yeah, no.
What's the point of going if you're going to break the railroad strike?
Break the rail. And even my dear brother Bernie fell for it and started telling everybody he's the strongest pro-union president since FDR and so. Please, he's got some significant legislation for infrastructure. Let's just tell the truth. But he's never been this pro-union, deep solidarity of working people. He's tied to the corporate elites the way 98% of the elected officials in the Democratic Party and Republican Party are. Let's just be honest about this thing.
He didn't push the PRO Act. I don't recall him getting in there and pushing that. He could have pushed the PRO Act.
That's
I mean,
exactly
did you blame the parliamentarian for that one, or was that she was just the fault of the minimum wage?
Well, and as I've said, I tend to lean more conservative on a number of these issues. But I even said to Jen, I said, President Biden's administration was finished when he said the parliamentarian told me I can't pass a $15 minimum wage. In his first 100 days, he said, "That's it, done, goodbye." And instead, what you couldn't even do what I believe is the more effective push when it comes to a true progressive policy. Obviously tuition-free public college was something that was heavily emphasized when Bernie was running. And of course, we will deal away with student debt the second we do have tuition-free public college. But to me, the emphasis needs to be on tuition-free trade schools. People need to be able to learn a skill and not have to go into debt in order to do that. You want to be an electrician, you want to know how to operate a rig, you want to be able to be a plumber. As far as I'm concerned, we need to be paying people to learn these jobs because they help our economy. And yet there is no encouragement in that direction. There were so many things that the Biden-Harris administration had the opportunity to do, and they did less than nothing. And that was before the genocide. The genocide was the creme a la creme. They just wanted to make sure that they left no doubt, once they are about to leave office in 2.5 months, that they were cataclysmic failures. And that is how Trump got back in again.
No, I think you're telling the truth there. And I would just even build on and even ground what you say, because let's look at it from the chocolate side of town. That when it comes to the Black freedom movement, the labor movement has always been integral and essential, because the masses of Black people have been not just workers, but workers on the lower rungs of the capitalist labor force. So any increase in wages has to do not just with access to resources, but also has a reflection of one's dignity and respect. Then in addition to that, if you're going to talk about student loans, and you recognize the masses of Americans of all colors do not go to college. I tell my students all the time, I'm so glad you're here, but it's 46% of American youth, and for Black folks, it's around 20-some%. So no matter what happens in relation to student loans, it's not going to have the repercussions and ramifications of the larger society, because the mass of folk never go to college. And for the professional managerial class, they can't believe it, because most of them are in a silo. Everybody I know went to college. First question asked, where'd you graduate? What'd you major in? What was it like freshman year? Hey, when I walked my neighborhood in Harlem, that's not the first question I asked my brother, what college he went to.
I find it also sort of akin to Kamala, part of her opportunity economy.
Yes.
That she kept talking about small business loans to Black men, as if all people want to own small businesses and run their own businesses. And if that should be the only way we should support people, is if they want to own their own business. And how many people do that? Like, so many people are just happy to work and just want to be treated fairly and paid properly.
That's exactly.
But so small business loans for Black men was like her version of reparations somehow.
And that was a last minute pandering, as you recall. But to go from a Black freedom movement that calls for a just society and a just economy to opportunity economy, opportunity in the face of justice is like a little stick in the face of a drone. I mean, let's be true to the best of the tradition of the Harriet Tubmans who's here, of Martin King, of Malcolm X. Those are not just names. These are people who gave everything, and they don't have a monopoly on truth. We learn from them, but we also build, because they missed some things as well. But when it comes to reducing it down to just opportunity, that's like taking the funk and deodorizing it and sanitizing it and sterilizing it, and think that that's a major offer to Black men. Yeah. That's true for anybody. That's not true for Italian men. That's not true for Greek men. It's not true for Jewish men. It's not true for Arab men. Let's talk about empowerment of workers, including escalating wages, in which people have rights to join unions, so they have institutional armors against the greed of the bosses.
This is also emblematic in many ways of the memory of Dr. King as well as Malcolm, in that they were allowed to talk about the racial divide from now until the cows come home. But the second they talk about the economic divide is when they needed to be silenced. And the same reason why your voice and Sister Nina Turner's voice have to be silenced, because it isn't about being a Black militant. It is about being a militant for economic opportunity. And that is not allowed in our rapidly deteriorating, broken economic and political system. Because when we talk about a living wage, we're talking about the ability to do a job that has value and sustainability. When we talk about universal health care, which I have to tell you, Dr. Weston, you probably experienced this on the campaign trail, a significant portion of the conservative rural voter agrees with single-payer health care.
Oh, I saw that. I encountered that. Yes, I did. I saw that and gave them hugs, brother.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. And they gave me hugs. But I would add, though, brother, that issue of class that you talked about goes hand in hand, though, with imperial policy. When Martin King said that the bombs dropped in Vietnam also land in ghettos and barrios and poor white communities and working class context, there is a direct connection with all of that military overreach, all of those military resources, trillions and trillions of dollars going to war, then generates the austerity policies when it comes to healthcare, quality education, affordable housing, and what have you. So when you really raise the issue of economic justice, which Martin and Malcolm and Fannie Lou and Ella Baker and others did in the Black Freedom Movement and connected it with what they feel at Randolph and others had already been talking about deep connections with the trade union movement and dealing with the patriarchy in the trade union movement as well, dealing with the homophobia and the transphobia, because we had to be consistent, you see, that I want to be, not because I'm pure, but I want to defend any group whose back is against the wall and catching hell. So if you're going to demonize my precious trans folk, I'm with the trans folk. I don't care if it's one person. I don't care if it's two persons. I don't care if it's the worst kind of strategy in the world. If it's wrong, if it's dehumanizing, and you think it's still going to win, I'm not going with you. I'm not going that way. Now, that doesn't mean then that we don't have critiques of some of our trans and gays and lesbians and blacks and workers and women, because we have to be self-critical. None of us have the right for self-righteousness. But when it becomes just a matter of these little narrow strategies and tactics, and it leaves out the morality and spirituality, I'm not going that way. That I wasn't raised like that. You know what I mean? That ain't me at all.
That's how I feel. This is a very challenging time. Like, I feel like there's definitely been a line drawn, and it's very dark. And it should be, like, it needs to be until everybody is free, nobody's free. And while this is going on, it should feel dark. I would feel more concerned if it didn't feel that way to me. But the amount of people where that's not the case is so unsettling to me that I just have been avoiding a lot of interaction, because it's just devastating to me that people are just acting like everything is normal.
I agree. That when you got a real genocide going on and 20,000 precious Palestinian babies already killed and still being killed, how can there ever be business as usual? How can there ever be? You know what I mean?
I think one of the best 2 points as we wind down the conversation. First one is that President Trump is not inaugurated for 2.5 months. There is an opportunity right now, if they care so deeply about the plight of the Palestinian people, you can implement the arms embargo right now and make Trump have to remove it when he's in office. Make him do it. Put him up against the 8 ball, because if there is a stop to the genocide for 2.5 months, it's going to be very difficult to ramp it up again once he's officially in power. And he'll have his first 100 days where he's looking to implement his mandate. And he has a mandate, so he's going to be doing a number of things, including that corporate tax cut reduction. There's going to be an immigration policy that will be implemented. There's going to be things that he'll be focused on. But the Biden-Harris administration has an opportunity right now to do something to salvage some form of their humanity before they are officially ushered into the dustbin of history. And it will be a dustbin of history, especially for Kamala. But they could do something right now and make a real difference. And I think it's on us to use our platforms to make it such. What do you hope to see over the next 2.5 months? And what do you see as the most effective strategy for grassroots organizing as we enter into this new Trump phenomenon, if you will, era that's going to start very shortly?
No, that's a wonderful point. I hadn't really thought about because I have so little expectation of the cowardly Democrats. For them to do anything courageous would take such a miraculous breakthrough. But I believe all things are possible. All things are possible. But what I am observing though more and more is people are saying, well, those people who've talked about both parties being so corrupt and tied to corporate interests and tied to big money and tied to greed, it's very clear that that's true because 67% of Americans said America's going the wrong way and neither party provided any kind of direction. And so much of the Trump vote was a kind of protest vote. Now, some of it was racist and patriarchal. Some of it was authoritarian. A slice of it was downright fascist. But Trump has the fascist spirituality. There's no doubt about that. And he's open to fascist policy. That's why I call him a neo-fascist gangster. But see, a gangster is somebody who has no ideology. A fascist does have an ideology, you see. And so I put it in the adjectival form rather than the noun because he's just a gangster. Trump just do anything for getting over. That's the way he's lived his life for the last 40-some years. But what that also means, though, is as more people see the corruption and the civic rot in the two parties and in the empire and its imperial policies, they're looking for other places. And now the working class in all of its complexity becomes more and more a central focus. People are going to have to talk about the working class because they're the ones who made this move toward Trump, supposedly, or at least being the crucial factor in that regard. And that means class issues are inescapable. That's very important. That doesn't mean all the other issues drop out. Race is there, gender is there, empire is there, homophobia is there, transphobia is there, and so forth and so on. And you got to keep the love in it too. So you're not going to be just creating a Manichaean view about all the workers have a purity and the other one. No, some of these workers are gangsters too. They need to be pressed. But at least the plight of working people and poor people has now to be more and more center stage. And those of us who are concerned about a much more revolutionary or fundamental transformative alternative have to be even more vigilant. That's why what you all do, so important. So important. And as I said before, don't worry about the despair. We ought to be on intimate terms with despair. But it's got to be retail. The wholesale, the overarching despair that paralyzes, no. Never be surprised by evil, never be paralyzed by despair. Hope is grounded in wrestling with despair, just like Jacob wrestling with the angel of death in the midnight hour in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. Emerges with what? New name, wrestler, new vision, new energy, new vitality, new organization, deeper solidarity. Ooh, even that old biblical text, the Hebrew scripture, can kick in for those of us concerned about the wretched of the earth all around the world, including those here in the United States.
Can't appreciate you enough. Your voice is so very much needed, regardless of where you stand in politics. Your voice is appreciated by everyone across the political spectrum. You are our generation's MLK and Malcolm X. We are very appreciative that you are continuing to do what you're doing. As you can attest, as Jen can attest, running for office is not glamorous. It is very seldom rewarding, but it can be deeply satisfying when you know how many people you're inspiring along the way. You continue to inspire, and we continue to be appreciative that you grace us with your presence, and we hope you'll join us again in the near future.
Oh, you all are just so kind. Love you both, and you all inspire me and thousands and thousands and thousands of others, and never forget that.
Thank you so much, Dr. West. It was so good to see you.
Always a blessing. Stay strong now. Stay strong.
Bye-bye.